Hi there, Finbar Dalton and Abraham Beluki here at Gigstart. We're super excited to be running our second episode of our new How To Hiring series, where we tackle one big hiring challenge a week and provide free actionable tips on how to solve it. So to get things started, Abraham, today we're going to be talking about quite a topical one, which is how do you achieve your headcount plans without breaking the bank? Why do you think this is such an important topic at the moment?
Yeah, well, firstly, easier said than done. But the reason why it's such an important topic is in this market, business's number one priority has become getting to profitability as quick as possible. I mean, most companies that we're seeing in the startup, scale up world, not just in the tech industry, but in general, are looking to stay lean. But at the same time, they still need to invest in talent because ultimately that's the only way they're going to really grow their business. So we conducted a few surveys to find out a bit more about how we're going to go about suggesting some solutions to this problem. So to start with, we found that 65% of companies will be increasing their headcount in 2024. However, 80% of companies that we surveyed had no clear headcount strategy going into 2024. So again, there is that disconnect because ultimately, how are you going to increase your headcount without a headcount plan? So getting into it in a bit more detail, I mean, the reasons why we saw at least the reason that they can't achieve those headcount plans, the biggest challenge they found was 60% of companies said, financial constraints is the main reason they aren't able to meet those plans. So Finbar, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a particularly interesting time, especially maybe after the boom of sort of 21, 22, where we saw just sort of like hiring on all cylinders, hiring really quickly, companies just going all out in building their teams. Obviously, the market's changed, a bit. Obviously, companies are trying to be more sensible at the moment, and they're trying to get more for less. I think that's the big challenge that a lot of companies are facing now. It's like, how do we achieve the same levels of turnover, productivity, but with less people or with less resources being invested? Obviously, an issue that I think all parts of society are currently struggling with at the moment. I think there's no doubt that like the funding environment has taken a hit. Companies are really trying to adapt in this new environment. I think the key thing here is that it's interesting to see that companies are still hiring quite a lot. 65% of companies are still growing, which is definitely positive for all of the candidates out there. There's no doubt that financial constraints is a big thing. I think on that point, it's like kind of a twin point. It's like one, sort of overall budget, but then companies also struggling with like cash flow issues. So, all companies are sort of struggling to get paid by their own customers, which then makes, their own budgeting and finances slightly more challenging as well when it comes to their own sort of internal processes. So obviously that's the challenge. I guess, what do you think companies can do then?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, so we've come up with 3 solutions. And another point in the challenge as well, just to add as well, is obviously we know that the funding market being down is another cause when it comes to building out the talent teams. I think there's 3 tips that we've come up with that we think can help you get the most out of your budget. So when it comes to hiring, first of all, is being specific on your core business priorities. So knowing where to invest your money, so which function in the company to invest your money in, is going to become incredibly important. The difference between hiring a BDR, for example, or putting up paid ads, investing the money in different areas to make sure that you actually get the most out of the business. I mean, do you have any other sort of points to make on that topic?
Yeah, I think on this topic, ultimately, if you have sort of less money to invest into your sort of talent and your headcount, like you're going to need to make sure that those investments that you are going to make really do move the needle. So it's important to really narrow down on the 1, 2, 3 things in your business that are preventing you from growing or will really sort of propel your growth further, and really sort of focus in on those instead of just trying to make loads of disparate hires that are all in different functions.
Yeah.
So I think when you are doing especially now, obviously coming into the new year, when you are doing your year planning, you need to get really specific on what are your core priorities as a business, where do you want to be next year from a revenue perspective, what are your current gaps, obviously, as you discussed, are there any ways to achieve those gaps without maybe investing in a full-time employee? Like, for example, could you bring in a contractor, or could you invest in technology or automation, for example, to help you be more productive? What's your current attrition rate? How many positions are you going to need to backfill in the next year? And then really narrow down on, who are your A players, who are your B players, and who are your C players. I think companies really need to fight to keep their A players. Like, it is still a really challenging market out there for the top talent, as we all know. So your strategy should really be focused on retaining that top 10, 15, 20% of your organization that really is having the most impact, and then identifying who are the next 2 to 3 hires that are really going to move the needle in the next 12 months to help you solve the gaps that your business is facing, and double down on those 2 to 3 investments instead of trying to make tons of investments that aren't so concentrated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's almost similar to private investing as well. It's like when you have a massive fortune, you can be diversified, and that's great. If you don't have much money to invest, you should probably invest in one area if you're really to profit. And you mentioned earlier contractors, so that leads us on to our second point as well, which is our second tip is using fractional advisors. So that would be, for example, whether it's a flexible solution to hiring, so maybe hiring a contractor to join the business as a talent acquisition person rather than building out an internal team that can become a sunk cost, or engaging with an embedded recruitment solution rather than, again, perhaps contingent one. What are your thoughts when it comes to fractional advisors?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one when you look at the overall sort of recruitment market. Like, I think in 2021, 22, there was a massive boom and demand for sort of internal recruiters. Like, everybody was trying to get their hands on new internal recruiters. Everybody was hiring. And a lot of people were even losing internal recruiters because everybody was offering better salaries. And that led to quite big sort of capacity challenges internally at organizations. I think there was one point where I was talking to one of my clients, and they were saying that at any one point in time, each of their internal recruiters was handling between 40 to 50 open vacancies, because they had lost quite a few internal recruiters on their team, and so capacity had just become unmanageable in that scenario. Obviously now capacity isn't as high. There are fewer vacancies on the market, tech specifically, but at the same time, companies have fired a lot of internal recruiters.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more capacity constraints on the actual hiring manager instead of the recruiter, because they're having to do a lot more of the recruitment themselves. And I think that's really challenging when you're trying to balance your other priorities on top of recruiting. Me and that we do recruiting all day. It takes a lot of time to come up with the job description, sift through hundreds of candidates, and manage that process.
Yeah.
So obviously that's the problem at the moment, is that hiring managers don't have the support that they used to. But then it's, how do you solve that? Well, obviously, you could go down the agency route, but that's going to be expensive, which means that on this topic, if you go back to how do you hit your headcount plans without breaking budget, well, that's probably going to break the budget.
Yeah.
So there are other, maybe that you need to kind of identify sort of other options, and I think sort of embedded and fractional advisors can be quite good in that perspective, because yes, they might be slightly more expensive than hiring an internal recruiter, for example, but at least you don't have the cost of, if your internal recruiter isn't hiring or they don't have that same demand, it's kind of like what do they call that? It's a stranded asset. I think that's the word. Sunken cost.
Sunk cost, stranded assets.
Yeah.
And I think you raised some really good points there as well. Now, in terms of the third point, this is reducing churn. So it costs a lot more to replace a hire, or when you lose a hire, than to make a new hire. We see it firsthand. I mean, you mentioned earlier about trying to keep your A players as much as possible because it is very difficult to replace them. That market hasn't changed, to be honest. A lot of companies right now are being pickier because there's more candidates in the market and the supply is higher, the number of applicants are higher. But what that means is the top performers are going to be even more in demand then. So obviously reducing churn is a huge point, and that can be a very useful way of reducing the cost when it comes to hiring. Are there any ways that you can see companies reducing churn in particular, or any ways that retention could be increased in organizations?
Yeah, I think firstly, like, one of the problems startups face is obviously by design, like they haven't had time to develop sort of the internal processes to like maximize retention internally. So when we do look at the wider software industry and compare it to other verticals or other sectors, what we do see is a much higher, a much higher attrition rate in software than we do see in maybe, you know, more traditional industries like consumer, manufacturing, automotive, etc. You know, I think some of the biggest companies in software that have even now been around for 20 years still have half the retention of larger sort of companies within the automotive sector, for example. But yeah, in that regard, you know, in terms of sort of maximizing retention, I think it really comes down to it's quite a big topic, but I think it comes down to, you know, ensuring that people are set up for success in your business, that you have like proper monitoring in place to ensure that you're actually measuring sort of employee satisfaction in your business on a regular basis, you know, that you are actually monitoring the levels of attrition within your business. I think you'd be surprised how many companies don't actually know the total cost that their recruitment process is costing them when it comes to attrition, or don't know what percentage of their workforce is, you know, a year. So I think number one, like get clarity on that, like get the data, get the dashboard set up. Two, survey your people, understand, you know, why are they leaving, what are they not enjoying about the organization, conduct like a really thorough exit interview process to really get into the weeds in that. And then maybe step three, what I would say is like, look at your competitive landscape. Okay, well, if you find that 20% of your employees are moving to a specific company within your industry, you know, maybe that's like to a bigger tech company like Amazon or Microsoft, or maybe it's to a direct competitor. Like, what is it that's attracting to them, to that company? You know, what is it about their employer value proposition that they put together that is really attractive for those candidates? Are you providing the same compensation as those companies? Are they providing other benefits that make working there more attractive? For example, well, this is a bit of a inside tip to next week's one, but you know, we recently ran a poll on, you know, how many candidates would leave their job if they had to work in office 3 times a week. So, you know, are you providing the right flexibility in terms of working environment? So those would be my 3 tips, really, in terms of maximizing retention in that regard.
Yeah, and as you say, a huge topic that I'm sure we'll tackle in a bit more detail on another episode as well. I think the main point being, again, that the tenure for these companies, especially in the tech sector, being far lower than traditional industries is really interesting. I mean, I believe it's 1.7 years. And you'll find out more about that when we release our hiring ROI tool soon as well. But no, I agree. I think those are 3 tips that can help you achieve your headcount plans without breaking the bank. Any other questions, you know, or any other suggestions for perhaps some of the challenges that you've experienced, or maybe any other points that we didn't raise when it comes to achieving headcount plans? We'd definitely be happy to see that as well. Is there anything else that you wanted to add as well before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think just on the final bit when it comes to retention, just don't be a leaky bucket. You know, make sure that you've got that under control, and make sure that you are measuring it, because I think it will bite you down. You know, if you're having to like pay the cost of rehiring somebody every time because your retention is really bad, like ultimately over time that's going to cost you a lot of money. So
yeah,
I think that isn't just a short-term thing, but definitely a long-term thing as well when you do think about your talent strategy overall.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And the only other thing I would add is as well, we will also be releasing a tool that would help you build your talent strategy as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that, and we'll definitely let you know when that comes out. But thanks anyway, and see you next time. Bye-bye.